you're going to see that with the parable of the 10 virgins, some were ready and some were prepared, some were not. With the parable of the talents, some were faithful and some were not. With the sheep and the goats, some were faithful and caring for and loving God's people, and some did not do that. And across all three of these parables or stories, there are four things. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says when he comes at his second coming, it will be like a thief in the night. So how do we prepare for this when Jesus says no one will know the day or the hour of his coming? Can we at least know the general season of his return? I believe Matthew chapter 25 gives us insight into these kinds of questions. In this final episode, we're going to wrap up this series on the end times in the Gospels. Let's jump into Matthew chapter 24. Starting in verse 44. If you didn't already know, this is episode 23 of a 23 episode series on the end times in the Gospels. At the end of this, I will be releasing all of my notes, which is about 58 pages of notes for y'all to enjoy and process and meditate on. If you're just jumping into this, go watch the rest of this series. Please do yourself a service and do not jump in right here with us. Go watch the other episodes. It really lays the foundation for what you're about to hear. Verse 44, I warned you. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? Now I believe the fact that it's coming, Jesus is coming at an hour you don't expect, is because of the fact that when he comes, life will be normal. Everyone will be going on with their normal everyday activities in life. People will be getting married, people will be eating, people will be drinking, like the days of Noah, like the days of Lot. They'll be planting vineyards, they'll be harvesting, they'll be starting businesses. Life, the normacy of life, seems to mark the season of human history that Jesus chooses to come back in. That's why it's unexpected. But we can still be prepared for his return, be faithful, be ready, be holy, be blameless, be eagerly anticipating his second coming, and we can at least know the general season of his return and recognize the signs of the seasons. I'm not going to get into that. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household? In other words, here's what it looks like to be ready. It looks like being a faithful and wise servant that the master has set over his household, which is why at the end of John's gospel, Jesus is telling Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Care for my sheep. Do you love me? Tend to my sheep. Because preparing for Jesus' second coming, preparing for the kingdom and new creation means I'm investing into his people, I'm loving people and God, and I'm investing into the kingdom that's coming with new creation. So it's feeding them at their proper time. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set over all his possessions, that person. But you can be a faithful, blessed, wise servant doing the will of the master, like Matthew chapter 7 says. When Jesus comes, some will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we? And he'll say, I don't know you, number one, and you didn't do the will of my Father. So there's also the wicked servant who says to himself, And we see this in the parable of the talents, in the parable of the foolish virgins, in the parable of the goats and the sheep, which might not be as much a parable as it is reality. He says, my master's delayed. And because he doesn't expect his master to come back, kind of like we see the people of Israel seeing Moses on the mountain, and they don't know when he's coming back. I think this is a perfect parallel. And they actually say, that the text actually says, when they saw that Moses was delayed, they said, we don't know what happened to him. We don't know what's going on. So Aaron, make us gods who we can worship and feast and celebrate. And we can say, these are our gods. We don't know what happened to Moses. In other words, the delay of Moses, because he didn't come back on their time frame, because they grew impatient and bored, and it exposed their unfaithfulness and their lack of loyalty to the God of Israel, they started doing some depraved, wicked things as a people. Same thing here. My master's delayed, and he begins to beat his servants, and he eats and drinks with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he doesn't expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut that servant in pieces. We see this all throughout. If you watched a few episodes ago, I talked about those who are taken and those who are left. And those who are taken, it's all throughout the Gospels, are those who are taken into outer darkness, cast out of the kingdom, taken away, thrown into the fire like barren, dry branches that bore no fruit. And the master comes and cuts him in pieces, puts him with the hypocrites, and in that place there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now Jesus is going to continue to expound upon that idea of a faithful servant versus a wicked servant by giving us the parable of the 10 virgins, by giving us the parable of the talents, and then by ending Matthew 25 with the sheep on the right hand and the goats on the left. But before we go there, I want to take you to what I believe is a parallel of this. Jesus will tell his disciples, stay dressed for action. Keep your lamps burning, which seems to be a way in which Luke hints at or even shortcuts the parable of the 10 foolish virgins with the 10 wise. 10 are prepared, have their lamps trimmed and ready, have extra oil, they're still burning. The foolish, the 10 that aren't ready and are foolish, do not have oil. Either way, stay dressed for action. Be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. This is like a perfect parallel to the parable of the 10 virgins, 10 wise and 10 foolish. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake. So there's all these ways of explaining faithfulness and holiness and godliness and tending to the flock and caring for the sheep and feeding God's people and loving God's people and investing in his kingdom. Just like when Jesus comes back and he says to the sheep on his right hand, you guys, you fed those, you fed me, you clothed me, you gave me water, you visited me in prison. And then they'll say, when did we do that? And he'll say, to the least of these, when you did those things, you did it to me. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service, this master, this king, and he will have the servants recline at table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch, the third, and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. This also reminds me of when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he comes to Peter, James, and John 3 times and finds them sleeping when he told them, be awake, stay awake, temptation, resist temptation, be alert, that kind of thing, which I believe is why Peter says, hey, the enemy's roaring and walking around, prowling like a lion, because he's remembering that moment. But either way, in the Garden of Gethsemane, they choose to go fall asleep. They get tired. The flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. 3 times. In the second watch, the third, either way, he finds them sleeping. Know this, if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he wouldn't have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready. And Jesus is giving kind of commentary on his second coming. I'm coming at an hour you don't expect. I don't believe this refers to the Jewish wars in AD 70 with the Roman armies. I believe this refers to the actual second coming of Jesus. Verse 42 or verse 41, Peter goes, are you telling this parable for us or for everyone? And Jesus goes, in some way, he's answering the question, but in another, he's not. Jesus is about to give this answer essentially. Anyone can be a faithful and wise servant in my house. Whether you're an apostle, whether you're one of the disciples listening to this or not. Who then is the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Which sounds a lot like Matthew 24. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master's delayed, and begins to beat the servants instead of caring for them, the master will come on a day he doesn't expect, because he wasn't ready. He didn't anticipate the master would actually come back. He seems to believe that the master, there's a sense of the servant doesn't really believe the master is at all going to come back. He's unaware, he's caught off guard, and that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready, and did not act according to the master's will, he will receive a severe beating. But the one who didn't know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Here we see the degrees of just penalty seems to be in accordance with the degree of knowledge and understanding the person is held accountable for. Everyone to whom much was given, of whom much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. I mean, you can go on, but back to Matthew 24. I don't want to make this episode any longer than it needs to be. This is a parallel of what we see there. Now, Jesus is about to use 3 parables to essentially capture and summarize the main point of everything he just said in Luke 12 with the faithful servants, and right here in chapter 24, verse 45 through 51, which is you can either be faithful or you can be faithless. You can be responsible and wise or a wicked servant. You can be ready and expectant and eager and willing to do the will of the Father, or you just disregard the fact that Jesus is coming and live like he's not and don't do the will of the Father. I'm just going to summarize these parables for you. Y'all read these on your own. I don't have time to even go through them because they're so rich and they're so deep. Each of these parables deserves an episode on their own. But I think you know the parable of the 10 virgins. Some are ready, some are not. The bridegroom comes when they don't expect it, and the wise virgins have extra oil. They're prepared. The foolish ones aren't ready. They have to go and buy oil. They miss out on their chance to go with the bridegroom into the wedding feast, and then they're shut out. Parable of the talents, a master gives 3 servants a number of talents. To one servant he gives 5, to another he gives 2, and to another he gives 1, each according to his ability. He leaves, and eventually he comes back. The servant with the 5 and the servant with the 2 multiplied what the master gave. The servant with the 1 sat on what he had, and essentially is the wicked servant in this parable, because he excuses his disobedience and doesn't do the will of the master and doesn't even know the master, and he's kept out, actually cast out into darkness. And then we have the final judgment where Jesus, the King, will come back in all his glory. And he will gather the nations, and on his right there will be the sheep, the faithful, the righteous, those who did the will of the Father and trusted in Messiah for salvation and righteousness. On the left will be the goats, those who did not do those things. Real quick, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you at abovereproachministry.com. Go to the website or click the links in the description below to check out all of our free Bible study resources. We have online Bible classes, devotional studies, Bible study workshops, all of my sermon notes, and more. You can even join our online church community on the Discord app. We also have discussion groups all around the world, and if you don't see one in your area, message me and we'll help you start a launch group. I personally lead a group in Spartanburg, South Carolina. If you live in the area, we'd love to have you join us on Fridays for Bible study. So contact me if you're interested, and if you or your church would like me to come preach or teach, just message me or shoot me an email and we'll see what we can do, because I love preaching in person. If you're a new follower of Jesus, click the New Believer section to access everything we recommend for new believers. And be sure to snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, to support this ministry. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's jump back into the video. And in each of these 3 stories, you're going to see that with the parable of the 10 virgins, some were ready and some were prepared, some were not. With the parable of the talents, some were faithful and some were not. With the sheep and the goats, some were faithful and caring for and loving God's people, and some did not do that. And across all 3 of these parables or stories, there are 4 things, at least, that we should really note. Number 1, the righteous or the faithful or the prepared servants enter into the wedding feast, enter into the joy of the master, or enter into the kingdom prepared for them by God. Then we have the wicked, who are cast out into outer darkness, into eternal punishment, or left outside the feast. The third thing we see is that there is the master, or the bridegroom, or the king, who comes back to judge humanity, and he separates those who are faithful from those who are not. The fourth thing you're going to see is that in every one of these situations in parables, they're each given a degree of responsibility. They're each accountable, whether it's the virgins with the oil and the lamps, the servants with the talents, or the sheep and the goats, who each have chances to serve and love God's people out of faith in Messiah. This is what Jesus is pointing to, the final judgment The second coming, new creation, heaven and earth colliding, heaven coming to the earth. All of these different ways of explaining the end of the world as we know it, to usher in the full measurement of God's kingdom. So to capture everything that we have said thus far in this entire series, I want to make sure we all understand how this ends. Just to summarize, this is not just an ending session, this is a summarizing session. We saw in Matthew 24, Luke 17, and Luke 21, and Mark 12 that all of these accounts all refer to judgment. We saw how in Luke's account the stones crying out is the ruins of Jerusalem, and the temple crying out for judgment and justice against that wicked generation. We saw that throughout Matthew 24, not everything is literal. There's hyperbolic language, there's metaphorical language, there's figures of speech, there's all kinds of different imagery and poetic, apocalyptic language being used. And how we discern through those things is quite difficult at times. We saw the end of the age in Matthew 24 refers to AD 70, what marks the end of the temple age and the old covenant and the way God related to the world through national Israel. We saw the earthquakes, the famines, the wars, and all those political unrest kind of signs. Those already happened. We saw the gospel going to the whole known world. That happened. We saw the abomination of desolation was the Roman army surrounding Jerusalem and coming in to destroy the temple like King Nebuchadnezzar. It's almost like an escalation of what we see Antiochus Epiphanes do. The Great Tribulation refers to the Jewish wars and the destruction of Jerusalem. The Great Tribulation Jesus is referring to. The mass deception he's referencing is the false prophets and false Christs of the early church leading up to AD 70. When Jesus comes like lightning, we saw that is more appropriately imaged in the sunrise to the sunset, the bright shining across the sky. We saw the sun and moon going dark, or the stars falling from heaven, is apocalyptic imagery that the biblical authors and prophets will employ throughout their writings. It's a poetic way of capturing and communicating these ideas of what is happening in human history and in a geographical place. It's a great way of capturing the way that audience is experiencing certain things. The sign of the Son of Man in heaven is either or both the actual phenomenon in the skies that are recorded by early historians, or the Roman armies that are a sign of Jesus being at the right hand of the Father in heaven. Jesus coming on a cloud speaks to not a literal coming, but a metaphorical way of Jesus coming through the Roman armies to vindicate his name, bring justice and judgment on that wicked generation that crucified him. We see this throughout the Old Testament. The fig tree is an image of the end times and of the season that they were in. The generation that faces the tribulation is the generation of Jesus' day. It seems to mark at least and most appropriately a 40-year time frame of people being alive and seeing Jesus and experiencing his church and his spirit and the works that he does. Heaven and earth passing away seems to be a different day than what Jesus has referenced for the first half of Matthew 24 up to verse 35. Heaven and earth passing away is the second coming of Jesus, or the day of God, the all caps ultimate day of the Lord. And then Jesus' second coming is like Noah's day, in the sense that it catches the wicked by surprise, that people are living normal everyday life, and we saw that the ones who are taken aren't actually believers who are raptured and caught in the air. Though that happens, that's not what the ones who are taken is referencing. The ones who are taken are the wicked. God brings heaven to the earth. His kingdom invades the world. New creation comes in. Jesus comes in to rule and reign with his people in the new creation. And the wicked are taken away while the righteous inherit the earth with Jesus. That is how we're going to end this series on Matthew 24. It's a lot. I encourage you to watch, go through and rewatch. If you've already seen these, go rewatch, take notes, pray through these things. Don't just take my word as it is. Think through these things critically, pray through them, meditate on these scriptures, really ask God for clarity. I understand that my views are not the only legitimate views. There are other perspectives. And at the end of the day, I totally could be wrong in some ways, and I'm open to correction. But as far as I've learned things and unlearned things and adopted views and dropped different views, this is where I stand now as a 31-year-old just trying to follow Jesus as best as I can. So that's the end of this series. I won't keep you any longer. Thanks for watching. Eventually we'll get into Revelation and Zechariah 14 and other passages that speak of end times. For now, this is enough. So go watch the rest of the series if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to share your thoughts and your insights in the comments. If you want to share your thoughts and questions about these studies, join us every Thursday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live discussion together. And thank you for supporting this ministry. Your support helps us accomplish our mission, which is to teach people how to read the Bible so they can live and teach it for themselves. We're only able to make all of these free resources because of generous supporters like you. So thank you very much for all of your support. Make sure to visit abovereproachministry.com to check out all of our free resources. And as always, keep moving towards Jesus.